She stepped off that train with nothing but $3 in her pocket and a heart full of ashes. A woman nobody wanted. A woman the whole town watched get rejected right there on the platform. But what happened next? A stranger walked up to her. A man the entire territory feared. A man with 2 wild sons and a dead wife buried in secrets. He leaned in close and whispered 5 words that would change everything. "My twins need a mother like you." She did not know that saying yes would drag her into a web of murder, betrayal, and a love she never expected to find. She did not know that an 8-year-old boy held the key to destroying the most powerful man in Kansas. And she did not know that before this was over, she would have to choose between running for her life or fighting for a family that was never supposed to be hers. This is the story of Lydia Crane and the cowboy who bought her future with a whisper. This story reminds us that home is not a place. Home is the people you fight for and the people who fight for you. Sometimes your worst moment is exactly where your real life begins. And sometimes the family you choose becomes stronger than the family you lost. If this story touched your heart, do me a small favor. Hit that like button. It only takes a second, but it helps more people find stories like this one. Drop a comment below. Tell me, would you have had the courage to stay and fight? Or would you have taken the $5,000 and run? And if you want more stories about love, redemption, and second chances, hit subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the next one. The train screamed into Abilene, Kansas on a September afternoon in 1876, carrying with it the smell of coal smoke, cattle, and broken dreams. Among the passengers stepping onto that dusty platform was a woman who had bet everything she had on a single advertisement in a Chicago newspaper. She did not know that within the hour she would be publicly rejected, left with nothing but a worn trunk and fading hope. But sometimes, the worst moment of your life is exactly where your true story begins. This is the tale of Lydia Crane and the cowboy who whispered words that would change both their destinies forever. Lydia stepped off the train car with careful precision, her boots meeting the wooden platform with a hollow thud. 5 days she had traveled from Chicago, 5 days of rattling cars and sleepless nights. 5 days of watching the landscape transform from city streets to endless prairie. Her dress was black, faded from too many washings, the color of mourning worn so long it had become her second skin. She was 27 years old, though grief had carved lines around her eyes that made her look older. Her dark hair was pinned back severely, and her face showed exhaustion rather than hope. She carried no illusions about what awaited her. She carried only necessity. The Abilene station was chaos incarnate. Cowboys shouted at each other across the platform. Cattle lowed from the nearby stockyards, their smell thick and ever-present. Red dust coated everything, settling into the creases of her dress, into the corners of her eyes. Porters pushed past her without acknowledgement. A woman selling tamales from a cart called out prices in Spanish and English. Lydia stood still amid the swirl of humanity, one hand gripping the handle of her battered trunk, her eyes scanning the crowd for the man who had summoned her here. Marcus Welton, bank manager, widower seeking governess for his children. That was what the advertisement had said. That was the promise that had pulled her 2,000 miles from everything she knew. She spotted him near the ticket office, a portly man in a too fine suit, looking uncomfortable in the heat. But he was not alone. A woman stood beside him, thin as a rail, with sharp eyes and sharper cheekbones. Even from 20 feet away, Lydia could see the illness in her pallor, the jealousy in her gaze. Her heart sank. Marcus Welton approached with his wife on his arm like a warning flag. His smile was nervous, apologetic before he even spoke. "Mr. Welton," Lydia said, extending her hand. "I am Lydia Crane." The wife stepped forward before Marcus could respond. Her eyes traveled over Lydia from head to toe, cataloging every detail with the precision of a judge pronouncing sentence. "You are too young," the woman said flatly, "too fresh. We need a governess for our children, not someone to replace me while I'm still breathing." "Harriet," Marcus began weakly, "do not Harriet me." She turned to Lydia with cold finality. "There has been a misunderstanding, Miss Crane. Your services will not be required." The words landed like stones in still water, their ripples spreading outward into silence. Lydia felt the platform seem to tilt beneath her feet. She had spent every penny she had on the train ticket. She had burned every bridge in Chicago to get here. She had nothing waiting for her back east. No family, no friends, no future. But she did not cry. She did not beg. She had learned long ago that tears changed nothing. "I understand," Lydia said quietly. She was proud that her voice did not shake. "Is there a boarding house nearby where I might find lodging?" Marcus Welton had the decency to look ashamed. "Rosa Delgado runs a clean establishment on Texas Street." She paused. "I'm sorry, Miss Crane. Truly." Lydia watched them walk away, the sick wife leaning on her husband's arm, shooting one final suspicious glance over her shoulder. The crowd around the platform continued its chaos as if nothing had happened. Cowboys loaded cattle. Merchants haggled over prices. A child chased a dog through the dust. No one noticed the woman in the faded black dress standing alone with her trunk. That was perhaps the cruelest cut of all. Not mockery, not cruelty, just indifference. The frontier swallowed people whole every day. One more rejected woman was barely worth a second glance. Lydia sat down on her trunk because her legs would no longer hold her. She opened her small purse and counted the coins inside. $3.47. Enough for perhaps 3 nights at a boarding house, or a train ticket east. But east to where? There was no one waiting for her. The apartment in Chicago was gone. The teaching position she had abandoned would not take her back. She closed her eyes against the bright Kansas sun and saw flames, orange and red and hungry, devouring everything she had ever loved. She heard a child screaming, a sound that had haunted her dreams for 5 years. Charlotte. Her daughter's name was a wound that never healed. Lydia dug her fingers into the worn leather of her trunk, forcing herself back to the present. The past was a fire she could not outrun. The future was a void she could not see into. She had only this moment, this platform, this dust-covered town in the middle of nowhere. Somewhere to her left, a commotion broke out. "Rosa, you know anyone looking for work?" A man's voice, rough with exhaustion. "I need help. Anyone." Lydia turned to look. The man striding toward the station was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a duster coat that had seen better days. His hat was pulled low, shadowing features that looked like they had been carved from granite and then weathered by years of sun and wind. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath his eyes. His clothes were wrinkled, unwashed. He moved like a man running on fumes and pure stubbornness. But it was not the man who caught Lydia's attention. It was the 2 boys he was dragging behind him. They were twins, maybe 8 years old, with matching dark hair and pale faces. One was crying and kicking at his father's shins. The other walked in silence, a small notebook clutched to his chest like a shield, his eyes fixed on something no one else could see. A Mexican woman in a colorful dress turned toward the desperate father. This was Rosa Delgado, Lydia realized, the woman Marcus had mentioned. Rosa studied the man with knowing eyes. "There is one," she said slowly. She gestured toward Lydia. "Just arrived, looking for work." The man followed Rosa's gaze. Lydia felt the weight of his attention like a physical force. He walked toward her, the twins trailing behind him like reluctant shadows. Up close, he was even more imposing, at least 6 feet tall, with shoulders built for heavy labor. A scar traced a white line from his temple to his jaw. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and utterly exhausted. He studied her for a long moment. She studied him right back. Him. "You afraid of children?" he asked abruptly. "No. You afraid of guns?" Lydia thought of Chicago in 1871, of flames and chaos and the world ending around her. "I survived Chicago in 71. Something flickered in those gray eyes. Not quite respect, but perhaps recognition. You afraid of a man the whole town hates? Lydia met his gaze without flinching. Are you afraid of a woman nobody wants? The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. I have a ranch 2 hours north of here. House is falling apart. These two have run off 3 housekeepers in 6 months. The last one lasted 8 days. He gestured at the boys. I need someone to cook, clean, keep them from killing themselves or each other. $15 a month, room and board, rifle for protection. Lydia looked at the twins. The crying one had stopped crying and was now glaring at her with open hostility. The silent one still clutched his notebook, drawing something with a stub of pencil, not looking up. What is your name? She asked the man. Silas Cade. I am Lydia Crane. Silas Cade nodded once, a sharp jerk of his chin. You want the job or not? Lydia thought about her $3.47. She thought about the train east to nowhere. She thought about the flames that still haunted her dreams. I will do it, she said. Not because she saw hope, because she was out of options. Silas Cade turned and began walking toward a wagon parked at the edge of the platform. The crying twin stomped after him, muttering under his breath. The silent twin finally looked up from his notebook. For just a moment his eyes met Lydia's. There was something in that gaze, something old and wounded and desperately sad. Then he followed his father, and Lydia picked up her trunk to follow as well. As she lifted the trunk into the wagon bed, the hostile twin leaned over and spoke directly to her. The last lady only lasted 8 days. The one before that was 5. He looked her up and down with contempt, far too old for his years. You look like 3 days, maybe. What is your name? Lydia asked calmly. Samuel, and that is Jacob. He does not talk. Lydia glanced at the silent twin. Jacob had settled into the wagon bed, his notebook open on his knees, his pencil moving in quick, certain strokes. What is he drawing? Lydia asked. Samuel shrugged. Same thing he always draws. The wagon lurched into motion. Lydia grabbed the side rail to steady herself, then looked over at Jacob's notebook. Her blood ran cold. The drawing was a house, carefully rendered with a child's hand, but unmistakable in its details. Windows, door, chimney, and surrounding it on every side, flames, red and orange and hungry, devouring everything. Lydia had seen that drawing before. She had made that drawing herself night after night in the asylum where they sent her after the fire. The wagon carried her away from the station, toward a ranch she had never seen, with a man she did not know, and 2 boys who carried secrets in their eyes. She did not know what awaited her at the end of this journey. But as the town of Abilene disappeared behind them, swallowed by the endless sea of tall grass prairie, Lydia Crane made herself a silent promise. She was done running. Whatever demons waited at this ranch, she would face them, because she had faced demons before. She had walked through fire and survived. What was one more battle after everything she had already lost? The wagon rolled on, carrying 4 wounded souls toward an uncertain future, and the Kansas wind whispered secrets through the tall grass that only the prairie could hear. The journey to the Cade Ranch took 2 hours of bone-jarring roads and suffocating silence. Silas Cade drove the wagon like a man who had forgotten how to speak, his jaw set hard, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Lydia sat beside him on the bench, acutely aware of every inch of space between them. The landscape transformed around them as they traveled. The bustling streets of Abilene gave way to farmland, then to something wilder. This was the Flint Hills of Kansas, a sea of tall grass that stretched to every horizon, rippling in the endless wind like waves on a golden ocean. Lydia had never felt so small. The grass rose chest-high on either side of the wagon track, and above it all hung a sky so vast it made her dizzy to look at. There were no buildings, no fences, no markers of human existence. Just grass and wind and sky, stretching on forever. She understood now why people went mad out here. The isolation was not just physical, it was spiritual. The land swallowed you whole. How much farther? She asked, breaking the silence. Silas grunted. Mile or so. In the wagon bed behind them, the twins had settled into their own silence. Samuel sat with his arms crossed, glaring at the passing landscape. Jacob continued drawing in his notebook, his pencil never stopping. Lydia wanted to ask about their mother, about the wife who had died under circumstances that had made the whole town hate this man. But she sensed that some questions were not safe to ask yet. So she watched the prairie instead, and waited. The Cade Ranch appeared on the horizon like a mirage. As they drew closer, Lydia felt her expectations adjusting downward with every yard. There were two structures. The first was a soddy, a house built from blocks of prairie sod, its walls thick and earthen, its roof sagging under the weight of years. It looked like something that had grown from the land rather than been built upon it. The second structure was a frame house, the skeleton of what might have been a proper home. Walls were up but unpainted, windows gaped empty. The porch was half finished, raw lumber bleaching in the sun. Eleanor wanted a real house, Silas said quietly. His voice cracked on the name. I never finished it. Lydia did not ask who Eleanor was. She already knew. The wagon pulled to a stop before the soddy. Silas climbed down and began unhitching the horses without ceremony. The twins scrambled out of the wagon bed, Samuel immediately running off toward the barn, Jacob moving more slowly, his notebook still clutched to his chest. Lydia gathered her trunk and stepped down into the Kansas dust. The inside of the soddy was larger than she expected. A main room with a cooking area and a scarred wooden table, two small bedrooms off to one side, and a loft space above. The walls were thick, keeping the interior cool despite the September heat. But it was the details that told the real story. Hand-embroidered curtains hung in the windows, faded now but once beautiful. A cookbook sat on a shelf beside the stove, its pages swollen with handwritten notes in the margins. In the corner stood a piano, its keys yellowed with age and coated with dust. A woman had lived here, a woman who had cared about beauty, about music, about making a home in this harsh land. And everywhere the evidence of that woman's absence. Unwashed clothes piled in corners. Dishes stacked in the wash basin, crusted with old food. Cobwebs strung between rafters. A layer of dust and neglect coating every surface. This was a house in mourning. Silas appeared in the doorway. He gestured toward the larger of the two bedrooms. That was Eleanor's room. You can have it. Lydia looked at the closed door, at the dust gathered on its handle, at the silence that seemed to emanate from behind it. I will take the small room by the kitchen, she said. Silas stared at her. Every other woman I hired wanted that room. The boys need to know I am not trying to replace anyone. Lydia met his eyes steadily. I am here to work, nothing more. Something shifted in Silas's expression. Not quite gratitude, but perhaps a loosening of some tension he had been carrying. Supper is at 6, he said. Then he was gone. Lydia spent the afternoon cleaning. She attacked the kitchen first, scrubbing dishes and scouring the cook stove, sweeping floors and beating rugs. The physical labor was familiar, grounding. It gave her something to focus on besides the memories that lurked at the edges of her mind. By the time the sun began to set, she had made visible progress. The kitchen was clean, the table scrubbed, a pot of beans simmering on the stove. It was simple fare, but it was hot and it was ready. Silas came in from the barn, washing his hands in the basin by the door. The twins trailed behind him, Samuel still sullen, Jacob still silent. They sat at the table in awkward silence. Lydia served the beans and the cornbread she had baked. Samuel made a face, but ate without complaint. Jacob pushed his food around his plate, taking bites only when his father glared at him. The previous cook could not make cornbread worth spit, Silas said finally. This is better. It was not much of a compliment, but Lydia took it. After supper, she cleaned the dishes while Silas retreated to the porch to smoke. The twins disappeared to their room in the loft. The house settled into darkness and quiet. Lydia was banking the fire in the cook stove when she heard it. A small sound, almost lost in the whisper of wind outside. Crying. She moved to the door and looked out into the night. The moon was rising over the prairie, casting silver light across the endless grass. And there, standing alone in the yard, was Jacob. He was not making a sound. His shoulders shook with silent sobs, his face turned up toward the sky, tears streaming down his cheeks. Lydia walked out to him slowly, not wanting to startle him. She stopped a few feet away and simply stood there, a presence in the darkness. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Jacob's voice came small and broken. "She is not coming back." Lydia felt her heart crack along old fault lines. "I know. She promised she would." Lydia knelt in the grass, bringing herself to his level. Sometimes grown-ups cannot keep their promises, not because they do not want to. Jacob turned to look at her. In the moonlight, his face was pale, his eyes too old for a child's face. "Do you promise things?" he asked. "No," Lydia said honestly. "I stopped making promises a long time ago." "Why?" "Because I learned that the world does not care about promises. The world just happens, and we survive it or we do not." Jacob considered this. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is for you," he said. Lydia took the paper. It was a drawing, rendered in the same careful style she had seen in his notebook. A woman with dark hair standing on a train platform, a trunk at her feet. "Her. You drew this on the wagon," she said. Jacob nodded. "You look like you lost something, too." The words hit Lydia harder than any blow. She looked at this child, this wounded boy who had stopped speaking after whatever horror he had witnessed, and she saw herself. "I did," she admitted. "I lost everything." Jacob reached out and took her hand. His fingers were small and cold. "Maybe you can find something new." Then he pulled away and walked back toward the house, leaving Lydia kneeling in the grass with tears she had not expected to shed. She stayed there for a long time, watching the moon rise over the Flint Hills, holding a child's drawing against her chest. When she finally went inside, she found Silas standing at the window watching her. "Jacob spoke to you," he said. It was not a question. He did. Silas's jaw tightened. "He has not spoken more than 10 words since Eleanor died. 2 years of silence, and he speaks to you on your first day." Lydia did not know what to say. She only knew what she had felt, kneeling in that grass. A connection forged in shared loss. "I should warn you," Silas said quietly. "This ranch has secrets. My boys have secrets. If you stay, you will learn things that might make you wish you had taken your chances back in Abilene." "I have secrets too," Lydia said. "We all do." Silas studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once and walked past her toward his room. Lydia went to the small bedroom by the kitchen, the one she had claimed as her own. It was sparse, just a narrow bed and a washstand, but it was clean, and it was hers. She lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would continue cleaning. She would establish routines. She would begin the slow work of turning this broken household into something functional. But tonight, she allowed herself one moment of weakness. She pressed Jacob's drawing against her heart and wept for the daughter she had lost, for the family she had failed, for all the promises the fire had burned to ash. "Charlotte," she whispered into the darkness, "I am sorry. I am so sorry." The Kansas wind howled outside the soddy walls, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang its lonely song to the moon. 2 weeks transformed the Cade Ranch into something approaching order. Lydia established routines with the precision of a military commander. Wake at dawn. Breakfast by 7. Lessons in the morning, chores in the afternoon. Supper at 6. Bed by 8. The boys resisted at first, Samuel with defiance and Jacob with silent withdrawal. But consistency proved more powerful than rebellion. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. Samuel stopped kicking furniture. He still glared and muttered and complained about everything, but the edge of genuine hostility faded from his eyes. He began to do his chores without being threatened. He even, on one memorable occasion, asked Lydia to show him how she made her cornbread. Jacob was more complicated. He still did not speak much, preferring to communicate through his drawings and the occasional nod or shake of his head. But he no longer hid when Lydia entered a room. He would sit at the kitchen table while she cooked, drawing in his notebook, and sometimes he would look up at her with those old, sad eyes and almost smile. Progress, Lydia told herself. Slow, but real. Silas noticed the changes, though he rarely commented on them. He spent most of his days out on the range, checking fences, tending cattle, doing the endless work that a ranch demanded. When he came home in the evenings, he was exhausted, coated in dust and sweat, barely able to eat before collapsing into his bed. But he watched Lydia with increasing interest when he thought she was not looking. She could feel his gaze on her sometimes, questioning, assessing, trying to figure out who she was and why she had stayed when so many others had fled. She had questions of her own, questions about Eleanor, questions about the death that had made the whole town suspicious of this man, questions about what Jacob had seen that had stolen his voice for 2 years. But she did not ask. Not yet. Some truths had to be earned. Instead, she devoted her nights to Eleanor's diary. Lydia had found it under Jacob's bed on her second day, hidden in a wooden box alongside an unfinished letter. She had not told Silas about either discovery. Something held her back, some instinct that said the time was not right. So she read the diary alone, by candlelight, after the house had fallen silent. Eleanor Cade emerged from those pages like a ghost made flesh. She had been a woman of strong opinions and stronger will, sharp-tongued and tender-hearted in equal measure. She had loved this land, this ranch, this life she had built with Silas. She had loved her sons fiercely, writing pages about their first words, their first steps, their small triumphs and disasters. She had also loved Silas, though their marriage had clearly not been peaceful. The diary was full of arguments, reconciliations, passionate declarations, and equally passionate denunciations. They had fought about money, about the unfinished house, about how to raise the boys. They had made up in ways that made Lydia blush to read about. But as the diary progressed, a darker thread began to emerge. Judge Cornelius Whitmore. The name appeared first in passing, mentioned as a neighboring landowner and local official, but the references grew more frequent and more troubling. March 15th. Whitmore was here again today. He stayed too long and looked at me in that way I do not like. When I told S about it, he said I was imagining things. Maybe I am. April 3rd. I have been going through the county land records for the school expansion proposal. Something is wrong. Homestead claims that should have been finalized are missing. I asked Whitmore about it at the church social, and he changed the subject immediately. April 20th. I know what he is doing now. The judge is selling public homestead land to the railroad companies at discount prices, pocketing the difference. These are farms that poor families were supposed to claim. Futures stolen by a man who already has everything. I cannot stay silent about this. May 10th. S and I argued again. He says I should let it go, that Whitmore is too powerful to fight, that I am putting our family at risk. He does not understand. This is not just about land. This is about what kind of place we want to live in, what kind of world we want our sons to inherit. The final entry was dated June 15th, 1874. Over 2 years ago, S says I should leave it alone. But this is the future of every poor family trying to build a life here. I cannot stay silent. I've written a letter to Judge Whitmore telling him what I know. I will give it to him tomorrow. Maybe he will have an explanation. Maybe I'm wrong about all of this. But if I am right, I am going to send everything to the newspaper in Topeka. The truth has to come out. After that entry, the pages were blank. Eleanor had died 2 days later. A fall from Widow's Creek Ravine, the official story said. An accident. But Lydia knew with a certainty that settled into her bones like cold that it had not been an accident at all. She was still thinking about the diary the next afternoon when she noticed the riders. They were on the ridge to the north, silhouettes against the bright September sky. 3 of them sitting their horses motionless, watching the ranch. Lydia set down the shirt she had been mending and walked to where Silas was working on the broken step of the unfinished house. "There are men watching us from the ridge," she said quietly. Silas did not look up from his work. "Whitmore's men. They have been watching for 2 years. Why? Making sure I do not leave, I expect. Making sure I do not talk to anyone who might listen." Lydia absorbed this. "Why do you not leave?" Silas drove a nail with more force than necessary. This was Eleanor's land, her father's homestead claim. She was born in that soddy. She raised our boys here. She died here. His voice cracked on the last word. "I will not let her killer drive me away. You know who killed her." It was not a question. Silas finally looked up, his gray eyes meeting hers. "I know, but I cannot prove it. He is the circuit judge. He controls the law in 3 counties. His word against mine, and everyone already thinks I am guilty." "What do you mean?" Silas set down his hammer. "We argued the night she died. Half the town knows that. She wanted to confront Whitmore about the land fraud. I told her it was dangerous, that she should let it go. She called me a coward and rode out to check the fence line. Alone, after dark. They found her at the bottom of Widow's Creek Ravine the next morning, his hands clenched into fists. They said she fell, that her horse must have spooked, thrown her. But Eleanor grew up on this land. She knew every rock, every trail. That woman never fell off a horse in her life." Lydia thought about the diary, about the letter Eleanor had planned to deliver, about the truth that had died with her. "Jacob was with her that night," Silas continued quietly. "I found him wandering near the ravine at dawn, covered in mud, eyes blank. He has not spoken about that night since, has not spoken much about anything. Someone scared him into silence," Lydia said, "or something." Silas shook his head. "The doctor said it was shock, trauma. Said it might get better with time." He looked toward the house where Jacob was visible through the window, drawing in his notebook. 2 years is a long time. Lydia made a decision in that moment. She was not sure if it was wise, but wisdom had never been her strong suit. "I found something," she said, "under Jacob's bed. A diary. Eleanor's diary." Silas went very still. "And a letter, unfinished, addressed to Judge Whitmore. Why did you not tell me before?" "Because I was not sure I could trust you yet." Silas stared at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. A harsh sound without much humor, but real. "Fair enough," he said. "And now?" "Now I think you need to read what your wife wrote." She led him to the small box she had hidden under her own bed. She handed him the diary and the letter, and watched his face as he read. The sun set behind the Flint Hills as Silas Cade learned the full extent of what his wife had discovered. Learned what she had planned to do about it. Learned why she had really died. When he finished, his face was pale and his hands were shaking. "She was going to expose him," he said, "and he killed her for it. That is what I believe." And Jacob saw it happen. Lydia nodded. The drawings in his notebook, a man in a tall hat, pushing a woman off a cliff. Whitmore always wears that hat. Silas closed his eyes. "My son watched that bastard murder his mother, and I have been sitting here for 2 years doing nothing." "You have been surviving," Lydia said quietly, "raising your boys, keeping this ranch alive. That is not nothing." Silas opened his eyes. The grief in them had transformed into something harder, something sharp, edged, and dangerous. "It is not enough," he said. "Not anymore." Before Lydia could respond, a shout came from outside. Both of them rushed to the door. Samuel was running toward the house, his face white with terror. "Pa, it is Jacob. A snake got him. He is by the creek." The next few minutes were a blur of fear and frantic action. Silas ran toward the creek. Lydia ran to the kitchen for the supplies she would need. She found Jacob lying in the tall grass near the water, his leg already swelling, 2 small puncture marks visible on his ankle. A rattlesnake, she realized. The prairie was full of them. "Move back," she told Samuel, who was crying now. "Give me room." Silas arrived as she was pulling her small knife from her apron pocket. "What are you doing?" "Saving your son. Hold him still." Lydia worked quickly, drawing on skills she had learned in a Chicago hospital after the fire, when she had volunteered to help the thousands of wounded because she could not bear to sit still with her grief. She made a small cut over the puncture wounds and sucked out what venom she could, spitting it into the grass. She bound the wound tightly with strips torn from her petticoat. "We need to keep him calm," she said. "Elevated. Still. The poison will spread slower if his heart is not racing." They carried Jacob back to the house and laid him on Lydia's bed. She sat with him through the night, monitoring his fever, giving him water, speaking to him in a low, calm voice, even when he was delirious and crying for his mother. By dawn, the fever had broken. Jacob was pale and weak, but he was alive. Silas had not slept either. He sat in the corner of the room watching Lydia care for his son, saying nothing. When the morning sun came through the window, he finally spoke. "You saved his life." "I did what anyone would do." "No." Silas shook his head. "Not anyone. The other women I hired would not have known how to help, would not have stayed through the night. You are different." Lydia looked down at Jacob, sleeping peacefully now, his small chest rising and falling steadily. "I lost a child once," she said quietly. "I could not save her. Maybe that is why I fight so hard to save others." She had not meant to say it. The words just came out, pulled from some deep place she usually kept locked. Silas did not ask for details. He simply nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, "for my son." It was later that day, after Jacob had woken and eaten and even managed a weak smile, that Lydia found the drawing. It was tucked under Jacob's pillow, a new one she had not seen before. She unfolded it carefully. The drawing showed a tall man in a formal hat standing beside a bed. The man's finger was pressed to his lips in the universal gesture for silence, and in the bed, a small figure, eyes wide with fear. Someone had threatened this child. Someone had scared him into silence. And Lydia was beginning to understand who. She folded the drawing and tucked it into her pocket. Then she went to find Silas, because there were things they needed to discuss, things that could not wait any longer. 1 month at the Cade Ranch, and Lydia had become essential. She cooked and cleaned and taught lessons. She mended clothes and preserved vegetables and helped with the endless chores that a working ranch demanded. She had learned to shoot the rifle Silas kept by the door, practicing in the evenings until she could hit a tin can at 50 yards. But more than that, she had become a steady presence in a house that had known nothing but chaos and grief for too long. Samuel had stopped testing her. He still complained about everything, still muttered under his breath when she assigned chores. But there was a new respect in his eyes. He had watched her save his brother's life. That had earned her something words never could. Jacob was speaking more. Not much, not often, but he would answer questions now, would occasionally volunteer a thought or an observation. He still communicated mainly through his drawings, but even those had begun to change. Fewer flames, more ordinary scenes of ranch life, progress. Silas had changed too, though in subtler ways. He spoke to her more in the evenings, sharing stories about the ranch, about the cattle business, about the endless small triumphs and disasters of frontier life. He asked her questions about Chicago, about her teaching, about her life before. She answered carefully, revealing some truths while protecting others. The connection between them was undeniable now. Lydia felt it in the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she was not looking, in the way her heart quickened when he walked through the door in the evenings, in the charged silence that sometimes fell between them, pregnant with words neither dared to speak. But she was not ready. Not yet. There were too many secrets still between them, too many walls still standing. And then Silas had to leave. "I need to go to Abilene," he told her one morning. "Cattle to sell, papers to sign at the bank. I will be gone 3 days, maybe 4. "The boys will be fine with me," Lydia assured him. "It is not the boys I am worried about." Silas's jaw tightened. "Whitmore knows I am watching him. He might try something while I am gone. Then give me the rifle and trust me to use it." Silas studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. The teaching came that afternoon. Silas stood behind her in the yard, adjusting her stance, guiding her hands on the weapon. His touch was professional, instructional, but Lydia felt every point of contact like a brand. "Breathe out when you squeeze the trigger," he said, his voice close to her ear. "Do not jerk it. Squeeze smooth and steady." The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The tin can she was aiming at flew off the fence post. "Good," Silas said. "Again." They practiced until the light began to fade, until Lydia could hit her target 9 times out of 10. When they finished, Silas handed her a box of ammunition. "Keep the rifle loaded by your bed," he said. "Do not hesitate to use it if you need to. I will not." Silas mounted his horse. The boys stood on the porch watching. Samuel looked worried despite his tough exterior. Jacob clutched his notebook, his face pale. "I will be back in 3 days," Silas told them. "Mind Miss Lydia while I am gone." Then he rode away, and Lydia was alone with the children for the first time. The first night passed uneventfully. Lydia made supper, oversaw evening chores, tucked the boys into bed. She sat on the porch with the rifle across her knees, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the prairie wind. No riders on the ridge, no sounds in the darkness, just the endless whisper of grass and the occasional cry of a night bird. The second day began normally as well. Lessons in the morning, chores in the afternoon. Samuel was surly but cooperative. Jacob was quiet but present. It was late afternoon when Lydia heard the horses. 2 riders approached the ranch from the south. One was an older man, dressed in a black suit that seemed absurdly formal for the dusty prairie. He wore a tall hat that Lydia recognized from Jacob's drawings with a cold shock of recognition. Judge Cornelius Whitmore. The other rider was younger, maybe 20, with a face that might have been handsome if it were not so troubled. His eyes kept darting around as if he expected an attack from any direction. Lydia met them in the yard, the rifle held casually at her side. Samuel had retreated to the barn at her instruction. Jacob had disappeared into the house. "Judge Whitmore," she said evenly. "Can I help you?" Whitmore dismounted with the easy grace of a man who had spent his life on horseback. His smile was warm, avuncular, utterly false. "Mrs. Cade." "No, forgive me. Miss Crane, is it?" "I am Cornelius Whitmore. I believe we are neighbors of a sort. I know who you are." "Ah, then Silas has spoken of me." Whitmore's smile did not waver. "I confess I am wounded. He and I have had our disagreements, but I always considered us friends. What do you want?" "Merely to welcome you to the community." Whitmore produced a small parcel from his saddlebag. "Sugar and coffee. Small luxuries, but precious out here on the frontier." Lydia did not take the parcel. "Silas is not here." "Yes, I know. I saw him leaving for Abilene yesterday." Whitmore's eyes traveled over the ranch, the house, Lydia herself. "I thought I would take the opportunity to introduce myself and to see how the children are doing." "The children are fine, are they?" Whitmore's voice took on a note of concern that was as false as his smile. "I worry about them, you know. 2 young boys growing up without a mother, with a father who is so often absent. It cannot be easy. They have me now." "Yes, Whitmore studied her with new interest. Chicago, I understand. You survived the Great Fire. Such a tragedy. You must have seen terrible things. Lydia's grip tightened on the rifle. Terrible things happen everywhere, Judge. It is what we do after them that matters. Very philosophical. Whitmore glanced toward the house. The boys. Are they inside? I would so like to see them. They do not want to see you. The words came out harder than Lydia had intended. Whitmore's smile finally faltered. I see Silas has been filling your head with his paranoid delusions. He has never forgiven me for testifying at the inquest about Eleanor's death. But I only told the truth, you understand. Only what I saw. What did you see? A troubled marriage. A woman who was becoming increasingly unstable. Whitmore shook his head sadly. Eleanor was a dear friend of mine once. It grieved me to watch her deteriorate. That is not what I have heard, is it not? And what have you heard, Miss Crane? Before Lydia could answer, a scream tore through the afternoon air. Samuel's voice coming from inside the house. Jacob! No, stop! Lydia spun and ran. She burst through the door to find Samuel holding his brother back from the corner, where Jacob was trying to reach a hunting knife that hung on the wall. Jacob's face was white, his eyes wild. He was making sounds that were not quite words, guttural and desperate. "Get out!" he was screaming. "Get out! Get out! Get out!" Lydia grabbed him and held him tight against her chest. He struggled for a moment, then collapsed into her, sobbing. "It is all right," she murmured. "It is all right. He is leaving now." She looked up to see Whitmore standing in the doorway, his face arranged in an expression of concern that did not reach his cold eyes. "Poor child," Whitmore said softly. "Such a troubled little soul. Perhaps it would be better for everyone if he were somewhere he could get proper care. There are institutions that specialize in cases like his." "Get out of my house," Lydia said. "Your house?" Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "I was under the impression this property belonged to Silas Cade, and I am telling you to leave it, now." The younger man, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, stepped forward. "Grandfather, perhaps we should go." Whitmore held Lydia's gaze for a long moment. Something passed between them, a recognition of battle lines being drawn. "Very well." He tipped his hat. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Miss Crane. I'm sure we will see each other again." He turned and walked back to his horse. The younger man followed, shooting Lydia an apologetic look over his shoulder. She watched them ride away, holding Jacob until the horses had disappeared over the ridge. That night, after the boys were finally asleep, Lydia sat on the porch with the rifle across her knees. Her hands were still shaking. She understood now why the whole town feared Cornelius Whitmore. It was not just his power or his position. It was the coldness in his eyes, the casual cruelty behind his polished facade. He was a man who had looked at a traumatized child and seen only an obstacle to be removed. And he had killed before. She was certain of it now. He had killed Eleanor Cade, and he would kill again if anyone threatened his position. The question was what to do about it. She was still wrestling with that question when she heard the barn door creak. Lydia was on her feet instantly, rifle raised. She moved across the yard in silence, her heart pounding. The moon was bright enough to see by, casting long shadows across the trampled earth. The barn door was open. A figure moved inside, barely visible in the darkness. "Stop right there," Lydia called out. "I have a rifle and I know how to use it." The figure froze. "Step outside. Slowly, hands where I can see them." The figure emerged from the barn. It was a man dressed in dark clothes, a kerchief pulled up over his nose and mouth. In his hand was a kerosene can. Lydia's blood ran cold. He had been planning to burn the barn, with the horses inside. Maybe move on to the house after. "Put down the can," she said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. The man hesitated. "I said put it down." He dropped the can. Then, before Lydia could react, he bolted. She fired into the air, a warning shot that cracked across the prairie like thunder. The man did not stop. He reached a horse tied behind the barn and was in the saddle before Lydia could get another shot off. She let him go. The alternative was killing a man, and she was not ready for that. Not yet. But as the hoofbeats faded into the night, Lydia made a decision. She was done being passive, done waiting for Silas to return, done hoping that if she kept her head down, the danger would pass. Whitmore had made his move. Now it was her turn. Silas arrived at dawn, riding hard. Rosa had sent him a message about Whitmore's visit, and he had not stopped to rest. He found Lydia on the porch, the rifle still across her knees, dark circles under her eyes. She told him everything. The visit, Jacob's breakdown, the intruder in the barn. Silas listened without interruption. When she finished, his face was carved from stone. "You should have run," he said finally. "Any sensible woman would have." Lydia met his eyes. "I have done enough running for one lifetime." Something shifted between them in that moment. A barrier falling, a connection forging. Silas reached out, almost touching her face, then stopped himself. "You do not know what you are getting into," he said quietly. "Then tell me." She stood, facing him directly. "Tell me everything. Because I am not leaving, Silas. Not now. Not after everything I have seen." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Inside," he said, "we have a lot to talk about." The days that followed Whitmore's visit were tense with waiting. Silas and Lydia fell into a new pattern. He no longer kept his distance. He told her everything he knew about Whitmore, about Eleanor's investigation, about the night his wife had died. In return, she shared the secrets of Eleanor's diary, the evidence of land fraud, the unfinished letter that had cost a woman her life. They planned together. They worried together. They kept watch in shifts, never leaving the ranch unguarded. The twins sensed the change in atmosphere. Samuel became even more protective of his brother, sleeping with a knife under his pillow despite Lydia's objections. Jacob drew constantly, filling page after page with images that Lydia could not always interpret. "We cannot stay on the defensive forever," Silas said one evening. They were sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the Flint Hills. "Sooner or later, Whitmore will make another move. What do you suggest?" "I have been thinking about the diary, about the evidence Eleanor gathered. If we could get it to someone who could not be bought, someone outside Whitmore's influence, maybe a newspaper in Topeka or Kansas City. That is a long way from here, I know, but it might be our only chance." Lydia considered this. "And the murder? Even if we expose the land fraud, he still walks free for what he did to Eleanor, one thing at a time." Silas's jaw tightened. "If we can destroy his reputation, his power base, then maybe someone will finally listen about Eleanor, too." Before Lydia could respond, hoofbeats sounded in the distance. They were both on their feet instantly, Silas reaching for the rifle by the door. But as the rider came closer, Lydia felt her heart sink for a different reason. She recognized that horse. She recognized that easy, too confident posture in the saddle. Thomas. Her brother rode into the yard with a smile on his face, looking like he had not a care in the world. He was dressed well, better than she had seen him in years, though there was something desperate lurking behind his charm. "Sister!" he called out, dismounting with a flourish. "I have been searching everywhere for you." "Thomas." Lydia's voice was flat. "How did you find me?" "Oh, I have my ways." He approached her with arms outstretched. "Are you not going to embrace your only brother? What do you want?" Thomas's smile faltered slightly. He glanced at Silas, who was watching with undisguised suspicion. "Perhaps we could speak privately. You can say whatever you need to say in front of Mr. Cade." Thomas's jaw tightened, but he recovered quickly. "Very well. I am in trouble, Lydia. I owe money to some dangerous people. I heard you were working for a rancher out here, and I thought you thought I would give you money. Or perhaps you could convince your employer." Thomas's eyes traveled over the ranch, calculating. "This is a decent spread. Good land. A man with property like this surely has some cash to spare. Get back on your horse and leave, Lydia said quietly. There is nothing for you here. Sister, please. Thomas dropped the charming facade, revealing the desperation beneath. These men will kill me if I do not pay. I would not ask if I had any other choice. You have always had choices, Thomas. You have just always made the wrong ones. They faced each other in the fading light, a lifetime of disappointment and broken promises stretching between them. Silas had remained silent throughout the exchange, watching and listening. Now he spoke for the first time. Miss Crane, perhaps you should hear your brother out in private. Lydia turned to look at him, surprised. Family matters, Silas said quietly. They should be settled in private. She understood what he was doing. He wanted to see what she would do, how she would handle this test. He was giving her the space to make her own choice. Fine, she said. 10 minutes, Thomas. That is all you get. They walked away from the house toward the unfinished frame that Eleanor had dreamed of. Thomas talked the whole way, a stream of excuses and justifications and pleas that Lydia had heard 100 times before. When they were finally alone, Thomas dropped all pretense. Look, I know you do not approve of me. I know I have made mistakes. But this is life and death, Lydia. I need $500 or I am a dead man. I do not have $500. But he does. Thomas jerked his head toward the house. I have seen how he looks at you. Play that right, and you could have anything you want. You want me to seduce him for money? I want you to survive. Thomas grabbed her arm. That is what we do, is it not? That is what we have always done, whatever it takes to get by. Lydia pulled her arm free. You have no idea what I have done to survive. Then help me, Thomas's voice cracked. I am your brother, your blood. Does that not mean anything? It meant everything once. Lydia felt something inside her harden, crystallize into certainty. But you used that up a long time ago, Thomas. With every lie, every theft, every promise you broke. She turned and walked back toward the house. Lydia, Thomas called after her, do not walk away from me. Go home, Thomas, or whatever hole you crawled out of. There is nothing for you here. She did not look back. Silas was waiting on the porch. He said nothing as she approached, just watched her with those gray eyes that seemed to see everything. He is leaving, Lydia said. Good. But Silas... She stopped in front of him, forcing herself to meet his gaze. He will probably try to steal something before he goes. He is desperate. Silas nodded slowly. I will keep an eye out. That night, after Thomas had ridden away into the darkness, after the boys were asleep and the house was quiet, Silas came to find Lydia on the porch. Your brother, he said, sitting down beside her. He is not a good man. No, he is not. And yet you did not help him. Some people cannot be helped. Lydia stared out at the moonlit prairie. They have to want to change first. Thomas has never wanted anything except easy money and someone else to blame when things go wrong. You could have taken his side, could have asked me to help him. I could have, but that would have been a lie. And I am tired of lies, Silas, tired of pretending, tired of running. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I know about Chicago. Lydia's heart stopped. Not everything, but enough. Rosa made some inquiries for me after you arrived. The sanitarium, the fire. Lydia closed her eyes. So you know. I know you suffered something terrible. I know you survived. I know you came here carrying ghosts. She waited for the disgust, the rejection. It did not come. We all carry ghosts out here, Silas said quietly. It is what we do with them that matters. Lydia opened her eyes. He was looking at her with something that might have been understanding, might have been compassion. I had a daughter, she said. The words came out before she could stop them. Charlotte. She was 3 years old. She died in the fire. Silas did not flinch. He did not look away. There was more. There was always more. But for now, this was enough. I am sorry, Silas said simply, for your loss and I am sorry for yours." They sat together in the darkness, two people bound by grief and circumstance. And for the first time in years, Lydia did not feel entirely alone. The morning brought another discovery. Silas's gold pocket watch was missing from the bedroom where he kept it. Thomas's work, obviously. Lydia found Silas examining the empty case, his jaw tight with anger. "I am sorry," she said. "I should have warned you more clearly. You did warn me. This is not your fault." He set down the case. "Family is family. We cannot choose them." "What are you going to do? Let him go." Silas shook his head. "A watch is not worth killing over, and if I chase him down, I leave you and the boys unprotected." He looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "You did right, sending him away. That could not have been easy. It was the easiest thing I have done in years." Silas almost smiled. "You are stronger than you know, Lydia Crane." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then Silas cleared his throat and turned away. "I should check the stock. Make sure Thomas did not help himself to anything else." He walked out, leaving Lydia alone with her thoughts and the memory of his almost smile. She was stronger than she knew. Maybe he was right about that. Or maybe she was just finally ready to stop running and start fighting back. 6 weeks at the Cade Ranch, and autumn had arrived in force. The tall grass of the Flint Hills had turned from gold to brown, rippling in winds that carried the first hints of winter cold. The days grew shorter, the nights longer. Work shifted from summer maintenance to winter preparation, endless tasks of storing and preserving and repairing. Lydia and Silas worked side by side through it all, mending fences, stacking firewood, salting meat for the long months ahead. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. Their silences grew more comfortable. The twins continued to heal. Samuel's anger had transformed into fierce protectiveness of his family, a category that now clearly included Lydia. He followed her around the ranch, helping with chores, asking questions about everything from cooking to shooting to the life she had left behind in Chicago. Jacob spoke more each day. His voice was still soft, still hesitant, but it was there. He told Lydia about his mother, about the ranch before everything changed, about the dreams he had at night. He showed her his drawings and explained what they meant. He was healing. They all were. But the shadow of Whitmore hung over everything. The judge had not made another direct move since his visit, but his men still appeared on the ridge from time to time, watching. Rosa sent word that Whitmore was asking questions around Abilene, digging into Lydia's past, gathering ammunition for some future attack. The storm was coming. Everyone could feel it. It arrived in the form of Marcus Welton. The banker rode up to the ranch on a gray October afternoon, his face drawn with worry. Silas met him in the yard while Lydia watched from the porch. "It is bad, Silas," Marcus said without preamble. "Whitmore is petitioning the county court. He wants you declared an unfit parent." Silas went very still. "On what grounds?" "Instability. The turnover in your household, 3 caretakers in 6 months. The circumstances of Eleanor's death, Jacob's condition." Marcus shook his head. "He is building a case that your children would be better off in the territorial orphanage. Over my dead body. That is what I am afraid of." Marcus glanced around nervously. "He has the ear of every official in 3 counties. If this goes to court, you will lose. There must be something I can do." Marcus hesitated. "There is one thing that might help. If you had a wife, a stable, respectable household with a woman to care for the children." It would undercut his entire argument. The words hung in the air. Marcus looked at Lydia, then back at Silas. "Just something to consider," the banker said. "The hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks from now." He rode away, leaving Silas standing in the yard like a man who had been struck by lightning. That evening, after the boys were in bed, Silas found Lydia on the porch. Their porch, as she had come to think of it, the place where all their important conversations happened. "You heard what Marcus said," Silas began. "I did. It would not be fair to ask you." Silas stared out at the darkening prairie. "You came here for a job, not to get tangled up in my problems. Your problems became mine the moment Whitmore walked through that door. Lydia turned to face him. I love those boys, Silas. I will not let him take them. Silas looked at her, really looked, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. I will not ask you to sacrifice yourself for us, he said quietly. Then do not ask. Just tell me what you need. A long silence stretched between them. When Silas finally spoke, his voice was rough. I need a wife. He cleared his throat. A legal wife. Someone the court cannot dismiss as hired help. Are you proposing to me, Silas Cade? I am proposing a business arrangement, a partnership. You would have your own room, your own money. I would sign over 10% of the herd to your name. No one could take that from you. A business arrangement. Lydia repeated the words, testing their weight. And what if I wanted more than a business arrangement? Silas flinched. I do not know if I have more to give. Eleanor took most of what I had when she died. That is honest. Eleanor used to say I was better at honest than kind. Lydia looked at this man who had taken her in when no one else would, who had trusted her with his children, his secrets, his grief, who was offering her security and stability and asking nothing in return but her presence. She should say no. She should protect herself. She should run as she had always run before she could be hurt again. But she was tired of running. Let me think about it, she said. Silas nodded. Take whatever time you need. He left her alone on the porch with her thoughts. That night, Lydia did not sleep. She sat by her window watching the stars wheel overhead, wrestling with a decision that would change everything. She did not love Silas. Not yet. But she could, she realized. Given time, given trust, given the chance to build something real. And she loved those boys. That was undeniable. Jacob with his drawings and his fragile hope. Samuel with his fierce loyalty and his desperate need to protect. They were not her blood, but they had become her family in every way that mattered. Toward dawn, a soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Jacob standing there in his nightshirt, his sketchbook clutched to his chest. I made you something, he said quietly. He handed her a drawing. Lydia took it to the window where the first gray light was beginning to show. 4 figures stood in front of a house. Not the soddy, but the frame house, finished and whole. 2 tall figures, and 2 small ones. A family. In the corner, Jacob had written in his careful, childish hand, Please stay. Lydia looked at the little boy who had lost so much and still found the courage to ask for more. Her decision was made. She knelt down and pulled him into her arms. I will stay, she whispered. I promise. It was not a promise she made lightly. She had learned that promises could be broken, that the world did not care about intentions or hopes or love. But some promises were worth making anyway. Some promises were worth fighting for. 3 days before the custody hearing, Lydia knew she could not delay any longer. She had told Silas parts of her story, about Chicago, about surviving the fire. But she had not told him everything. The worst of it still lurked in the shadows of her heart, waiting. If she was going to marry this man, even in a business arrangement, he deserved to know the truth. She found him in the barn that evening, brushing down one of the horses. The boys were asleep. The house was quiet. We need to talk, she said from the doorway. Silas looked up, reading something in her face that made him set down the brush immediately. What is wrong? Nothing. Everything. Lydia took a deep breath. Before I answer your proposal, you need to know who I really am. They walked to the porch, their porch, and sat in the chairs that had witnessed so many of their conversations. Silas poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a bottle he kept hidden from the boys. Tell me, he said simply. So Lydia told him. Not the sanitized version she had shared before, not the careful half-truths and omissions. Everything. I was a school teacher in Chicago. I had a husband named William. We married young, both of us thinking we knew what love was. She stared into her whiskey glass. We were wrong. What happened? William was charming and handsome and completely faithless. By the second year of our marriage, he had already taken up with other women. I found out when Charlotte was 2. Charlotte? My daughter? Lydia's voice cracked on the name. She was 3 years old when she died. Silas said nothing. He just waited, giving her space to continue. The night of the fire, William and I had a terrible argument. I had discovered he was seeing a barmaid from the South Side. He said cruel things. That I was cold, unlovable. That he had only married me for my family's connections. She drained her whiskey in one long swallow. I left. I stormed out of the house and walked for hours. I was so angry, so hurt. I wanted him to worry about me. I wanted him to suffer. By the time I saw the glow on the horizon, I was miles from home. Lydia. I ran. God help me, I ran as fast as I could. But the fire moved faster. By the time I reached our street, the whole neighborhood was gone. Just flames and smoke and screaming. The tears came now, unstoppable. I could hear Charlotte. I could hear her crying for me. But every time I tried to get close, the heat drove me back. I burned my hands trying to beat down the door. They found me the next morning, collapsed in the street. Charlotte and William were already ash. Silence stretched between them, broken only by Lydia's quiet sobs. When Silas finally spoke, his voice was gentle. That is why you blame yourself. Because you left. If I had been there, I could have woken them. Carried Charlotte out before the fire reached our street. Lydia. Silas set down his glass and turned to face her. The great fire killed 300 people. It destroyed 4 square miles of the city. You did not cause that. But my family died in a disaster that no one could have stopped. He reached out and took her hand. You are carrying guilt that does not belong to you. I left in anger. I abandoned them. You left a cheating husband. Any woman would have done the same. You could not have known what was coming. Lydia looked at him through her tears. You do not think I am a monster. I think you are a woman who has been punishing herself for 5 years for something that was not her fault. Silas squeezed her hand. And I think I know something about that kind of punishment. Eleanor? I told her to leave Whitmore alone. I told her it was too dangerous. She called me a coward and rode out alone. She paused. I was asleep when she died. In my bed. While she was being murdered, I was asleep. That is not the same. It is exactly the same. We are both still alive. And we hate ourselves for it. They sat together in the darkness, hands clasped. 2 people who had finally found someone who understood. I have one more thing to tell you, Lydia said finally. About Eleanor. She retrieved the diary from her room and handed it to Silas. There is something in there you do not know. Something she never got to tell you. Silas opened the diary to the pages Lydia had marked. She watched his face as he read, as the truth of Eleanor's secret sank in. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. She was pregnant. She wanted to be certain before she told you. Silas closed the diary with trembling hands. Whitmore did not just kill my wife. He killed my child. Yes. The silence that followed was heavy with grief and rage and something else. Something like resolve. I am going to destroy him, Silas said quietly. I do not care what it takes. Not alone, Lydia said. You are not going to do it alone. She was still holding his hand. She realized she did not want to let go. Are you sure about this? Silas asked. About marrying me? About everything it means? Lydia thought about the little boys sleeping inside, about the ranch that had become home, about the man in front of her, scarred and wounded and still fighting. I'm sure. Silas brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss against her knuckles. Then we fight together. 2 days before the custody hearing, Silas rode to Abilene with Eleanor's diary. Rosa Delgado had contacted a lawyer from Topeka, a man named Henderson who had a reputation for taking on powerful interests. They met at Rosa's boarding house, away from prying eyes. Lydia stayed at the ranch with the boys, every nerve on edge. She spent the day preparing, not just the children's clothes for the hearing, but their hearts. She explained what would happen in simple terms, how people would ask questions, and they would need to tell the truth. Samuel understood. He was angry about it, wanted to fight, but he understood. Jacob was harder. He had begun speaking more in the past weeks, but the thought of standing before a courtroom and telling what he had seen clearly terrified him. Lydia sat with him on the porch, his sketchbook open between them. "You do not have to speak if you cannot," she told him. "But Jacob, your drawings, they tell the story even without words." He looked at her with those old, sad eyes. "Will you be there? I will be right beside you. I promise." He nodded slowly. Then he turned to a fresh page and began to draw. Silas returned at dusk with news that was both good and bad. "Henderson thinks we have a case," he reported. "The diary is solid evidence of land fraud. Combined with the unfinished letter, we could bring charges. But proving murder is harder. Henderson says we need a witness, someone who actually saw what happened. Jacob saw it. Jacob is 8 years old. He barely speaks. Against a circuit judge with 30 years of reputation?" Lydia felt her hope deflate. "So what do? We try anyway. It is all we can do." They talked through the night, planning, strategizing, preparing for every possible outcome. By dawn, Silas had arranged for Rosa to hide the diary in a secure location. Only she would know where it was. "We can trust her?" Lydia asked. Rosa was Eleanor's closest friend. "She has been waiting for this day for 2 years. The day passed in tense waiting. Lydia tried to maintain normal routines for the boys, but everyone could feel the pressure building. Then, just before sunset, a rider came from Abilene. Rosa's boarding house had been raided. She was in the town jail, arrested on charges of harboring stolen property. The diary was in Whitmore's hands. "How?" Silas demanded when the messenger had gone. "How did he know?" Lydia's mind raced through the possibilities. "Who knew you were going to Rosa's?" "No one. Just Henderson. And—" his face went pale. "Marcus. The banker. The man who had first suggested marriage as a solution. The man who had seemed so helpful, so concerned. I told him I was meeting Henderson at Rosa's." Silas's hands clenched into fists. "That bastard sold us out. Maybe he did not have a choice. Everyone has a choice." Silas rode back to Abilene that night. Lydia stayed with the boys, the rifle across her knees, watching the darkness for threats that might come from any direction. He returned at dawn with murder in his eyes. "I confronted him," he said flatly. "He broke down immediately. Whitmore threatened to foreclose on the bank. Said he would destroy everything Marcus had built. So he betrayed us to save himself. He says he had no choice, that he has a family to protect." Silas spat into the dirt. A man always has a choice. He just did not have the courage to make the right one. The diary? Gone. Whitmore has it, along with the letter. Then we have nothing. Not nothing. Silas looked toward the house where the boys were just waking up. We still have Jacob, his testimony, against Whitmore with no evidence to support it. It is all we have left. Lydia wanted to argue, wanted to find another way. But she knew he was right. "The hearing is tomorrow," she said. "What do? We fight." Silas's jaw set hard. "And we pray it is enough." That night, after the boys were asleep, Silas found Lydia on the porch. "There is something I should tell you," he said, "before tomorrow." "What?" "If we lose, if Whitmore takes the boys, there is a good chance he will have me arrested too. Fabricated charges. It would be easy for him." Lydia's blood ran cold. "I need to know that you will take care of them, whatever happens to me." Silas took her hands in his. "We should get married, today, before the hearing. Why? Because if I lose tomorrow, at least the boys will have a mother when they take me away." Lydia looked at this man who had given her a home when she had nothing, who had trusted her with everything that mattered to him. "Yes," she said, But not because of the hearing, because I choose to. Silas pulled her into his arms. It was the first time he had held her like this, with intention rather than accident. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "For what? For not running when you had every reason to." They stood together in the darkness, holding on to each other. And Lydia knew that whatever happened tomorrow, she had made the right choice. Some battles were worth fighting, even if you might lose. Some people were worth fighting for. The wedding took place at dawn in Abilene's small church. There were no flowers, no guests except the twins and the nervous minister. Lydia wore her faded black mourning dress, refusing to pretend this was anything other than what it was. Silas wore his cleanest shirt and the belt buckle from his Union Army days. The ceremony was brief. When Silas said, "I do," it sounded like a battle vow. When Lydia said it, it sounded like a promise she intended to keep. Silas produced a ring, a simple gold band worn thin with years. "This was Eleanor's," he said quietly. "Is that all right? She was their mother. I am their mother now. It belongs on my hand." Lydia slid the ring on, and something shifted between them. This was no longer just a business arrangement. It was something more, something neither of them had words for yet. That afternoon, Judge Whitmore came to the ranch. Alone, no grandson, no guards, just an old man in a black suit and tall hat, riding up to the house like he owned it. "Mrs. Cade." He tipped his hat. "Congratulations on your nuptials. What do you want?" "Merely to make you an offer, a final offer, before things become unpleasant for everyone." Lydia sent the boys inside with a look. Then she faced Whitmore on the porch, her spine straight, her eyes steady. "Say your piece and leave." Whitmore smiled. It was the smile of a man who believed he had already won. "I know who you are, Lydia. I know about Chicago. The fire, your husband and daughter." Lydia felt ice form in her veins, but kept her face neutral. "I have contacts in Illinois." It was not difficult to learn the truth. He leaned closer. "A woman who could not protect her own child." "Do you really think you are fit to raise someone else's? Silas knows everything about me, does he? And he still married you? How desperate he must be. Get to the point." Whitmore's smile widened. "Here is my offer. You take the children and leave Kansas, California, Oregon, anywhere you like. I will give you $5,000 and drop all charges against Rosa Delgado, and in return, Jacob does not testify tomorrow, and you disappear. Silas can keep his land. I do not care about the property anymore." Lydia studied the man before her. The carefully groomed facade, the expensive clothes, the cold calculation in his eyes. And she saw something else. Fear. "You are afraid," she said softly, "of an 8-year-old boy. That boy is damaged, broken. No one will believe. I believe him. His father believes him, and tomorrow a courtroom will hear him." Whitmore's mask slipped, revealing fury beneath. "You have no idea who you are dealing with, girl. I built this territory. I control everything that happens here. Then you should not be afraid of a child's drawings." She stood. "My answer is no, Judge. I am not running anymore. Not from my past, and not from you." Whitmore rose, his voice low and dangerous. "You have just signed your family's death warrant. No. I have just chosen to fight for them." She watched him ride away, her heart pounding but her resolve iron hard. Silas emerged from where he had been listening inside. "You could have taken the money," he said. $5,000 is more than this ranch will ever be worth." "I know. Why did you refuse?" Lydia looked at the house, at the unfinished frame that Eleanor had dreamed of, at the two faces watching from the window. "Because some things matter more than money. And I am done letting fear make my choices." Silas pulled her close, holding her with a tenderness she had never expected from him. "Then we fight together," he said. "Together." The courthouse in Abilene was packed to the walls. Everyone in town had come to watch the confrontation they had been waiting years to see. Whitmore sat at the front, composed and confident, the picture of judicial authority. Behind him, his grandson Daniel watched with troubled eyes. Lydia and Silas entered with the twins. Jacob clutched his sketchbook. Samuel held his brother's hand with fierce protectiveness. The hearing began. Whitmore presented his case with surgical precision. The instability of the Cade household, the suspicious circumstances of Eleanor's death, Jacob's mental condition, a new wife who had been in a sanitarium. Every word was calculated to destroy. Silas testified. He spoke plainly about his struggles, about Eleanor's death, about the changes since Lydia arrived. His voice cracked when he talked about his wife. Whitmore cross-examined with cruelty. "Is it not true you argued with your wife the night she died?" "Yes." "Is it not true you were conveniently asleep when she fell?" "Yes." The murmurs in the courtroom were damning. Lydia testified next. She spoke about the children, about the household she had built, about the love in this broken family. Whitmore attacked her past. "Is it not true you were committed to a sanitarium following the Chicago fire?" "I was treated for grief. That is not a crime." "And your husband and child died while you were elsewhere, unable to protect them." "There was nothing I could have done, just as there was nothing Silas Cade could have done for his wife. Perhaps it is a pattern." Lydia saw the doubt on the spectators' faces. The case was slipping away. Then a small voice cut through the courtroom. "He is lying." Everyone turned. Jacob had stood up, sketchbook clutched to his chest. "The boy will be silent," Whitmore snapped. "Let him speak," the Topeka lawyer demanded. "He is a witness." Jacob walked to the front of the courtroom. His hands shook, his face was pale, but he caught Lydia's eye, and she nodded. "You can do this." He opened his sketchbook and showed his drawings one by one. The man in the tall hat watching the house. The man by the cliff's edge, his mother falling. The man pressing a finger to his lips. "I saw him," Jacob whispered, pointing at Whitmore. "I saw him push Mama." Chaos erupted. Whitmore pounded his gavel, shouting that the child was disturbed, that drawings proved nothing. Then Daniel Whitmore stood. "They are not the only evidence." The room fell silent. Daniel walked forward, holding a bundle of papers. "I found these in my grandfather's study. Letters Eleanor Cade wrote, letters she never got to send, and documents showing land fraud against homesteaders." He placed them on the table. "I loved you, grandfather, but I will not let you destroy another family." Whitmore's composure shattered. "You ungrateful whelp! I raised you, I gave you everything. You gave me lies, you gave me blood money." Daniel turned to the sheriff. "I will testify to everything I know." The sheriff stepped forward, finally seeing his chance. "Judge Whitmore, I am placing you under arrest on suspicion of murder and land fraud. You will be held in the county jail pending trial." Whitmore tried to run. Silas blocked the door. For a moment they faced each other. The man who had taken everything, the man who had survived. "This is for Eleanor," Silas said quietly, "and for the child you killed with her." Whitmore's eyes widened. Yeah, she was. The sheriff led Whitmore away in chains. Outside the courthouse, Rosa Delgado was released. She embraced Lydia with tears streaming. "You did it, Mija. You actually did it." The twins ran to their father. Samuel whooped with joy. Jacob pressed himself against Silas's legs. Lydia joined them, and for a moment the four of them stood together in the afternoon sun. A family. That evening, back at the ranch, the boys finally slept. Silas and Lydia sat on the porch, watching the stars appear over the Flint Hills. "What would Eleanor have said about today?" Lydia asked. "Probably took you long enough." Lydia laughed, a real laugh for the first time in years. "I like to think she would approve of me." "She would." Silas turned to her. She was a good judge of character. He took her hand. Eleanor's ring caught the fading light. "I said this was a business arrangement. I said I did not have more to give." "You did say that." "I was wrong." He met her eyes. "I do not know if I know how to love right. I failed at it once. But I would like to try again. With you. If you will let me." Lydia squeezed his hand. "I would like that." They kissed, not desperately, not frantically, slowly, like two people who finally had all the time in the world. The frame house was finished at last. White walls, glass windows, a porch that wrapped around the front. Eleanor's dream, finally built. Inside, Lydia taught a small group of ranch children, Jacob in the front row, drawing while he listened. He spoke normally now, though he still preferred pictures to words. Silas rode in from the range, dusty and tired, but smiling. Samuel raced out to meet him, already trying to be a cowboy. On the mantel sat two framed items side by side, a photograph of Eleanor in her wedding dress, and Jacob's drawing of a family, 4 figures in front of a house, no flames in sight. Evening fell. The whole family gathered on the porch, watching the sun set over the Flint Hills. "Home," Lydia said softly, when the boys asked where they were going after supper. She meant it now. She finally meant it, because home is not a place. It is the people you fight for, the people who fight for you. And Lydia Crane Cade had finally found hers. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.